Hey everybody, it's your girl Miss Cherie with the Vocal Truth Podcast. As promised, here I am tonight with the discussion of the vice presidential debate. I'm coming right after because if I wait another day, yeah, it's probably not going to happen. And while I say that I was going to kind of steer away from the politics for a while, I lied because part of my passion is making sure that Black people keep an idea of politics and what's going on. Because it does, as much as people say vote, don't vote, or are just ambivalent about the whole situation, voting impacts our lives. Politics impact our lives. So whether you try to hide under a rock or not, the politician you vote for or don't vote for, or whatever your preference is, will impact your life under that rock. So gotta go ahead and have that discussion. So going straight into it, Susan Page as the moderator, she seemed pretty mousy. A couple of times she tried to assert herself. I will give her that. But I really honestly felt like it was Pence against Kamala and Susan Page because Pence just don't. He's just like his boss. He doesn't respect anybody. He doesn't respect the process. He doesn't respect Kamala. He doesn't respect women. It's like he just bulldozed over the rules that Miss Page was supposed to be upholding. He did not care anything about the rules of the debate, how it was supposed to work, or any of that. He did not want to answer most of those questions. He just want to respond to whatever was verbally thrown at him by Ms. Harris. Now, here's my deal. Just to do like a couple of things, you already knew this was going to be a petty one. Now, overall, I knew this was going to be better. Zach says somebody said Pence looks like Adam on Lovecraft Country. Yeah, kind of did. He was really pale and red by the eyes. I said he was high. To be honest, I really think he was high. Because his eyes were like way too bloodshot and kind of glassy. Somebody else I know said that Pence looked like he was crying. But at the end of the day, I knew it was going to be a petty one in the beginning because when they were laying down the ground rules of the debate and how things were supposed to proceed, Pence looked at Kamala like you heard them rules, especially on the part where you're supposed to let each other speak. And I find that ironic because he wasn't letting her speak. Like he was still kind of interrupting. He did let Kamala speak some. She did very well with letting him speak, but the problem he had was staying on topic. He was ducking and dodging a lot of important questions on important topics, either by wanting to respond to a verbal jab that happened in the previous question when he was supposed to move on, or just in general, just really cheerleading for Trump, which is his job in this debate. Both of their jobs is to basically cheerlead for their bosses, so that's fine. So I get it. The other part to that was let's go straight into some of the topics. So, when they started off with the coronavirus response talks, of course, Kamala is spitting like campaign stuff, campaign rhetoric, and things like that. And when it came down to, she's talking about when the vaccine comes out, they will provide a free vaccine. The funniest part was when they had a follow-up question about if she would take the vaccine. That she really did a Black moment. Like, look, if the doctors say I'm going to say take it, I'm going to take it. But if Trump said, I ain't taking shit, basically what she was trying to say, but not saying her sister girl way. Plus, I have to bring up the fact that she was giving me faces. That Black woman, when we're over it, the faces give it away, and baby, she was over it. But she was checking everybody left and right for her respect, which I'm pretty sure she already expected needed to be done, so she was ready. But when it came down to talks about coronavirus responses, the only problem I have about that, about future contenders for like a political office, is everything they say sounds like a fairy tale. So it's easy to criticize when you're not the one in the hot seat. The only one who was in the hot seat before was Biden as vice president. When we had, swine flu and the Ebola outbreak. And ironically, something like Ebola, which was the equivalent of, it's not saying it's the same disease, but it was the same thing. It had the potential to be this huge outbreak. A lot of people did get infected. Not a lot of people died, and Ebola is a deadly virus. So, but it's also a virus that's known, and I don't think it was mutated. So by the time that this new outbreak came about, they didn't have medications for it. But when they talk about the responses, what flustered me is Kamala's over here giving the equivalent of what I like to call the fairy tale version of events of what they would do if they, it's easy to say all the right things when you weren't there. But when it came to Pence, he actually was saying Trump was right for blocking travel to the US from China. I really don't. Maybe somebody can fill me in on what is the Trump Pence tickets beef with China. Like, Trump legit went for China's head with the tariffs on Chinese imports. He like everything China related, he's blaming China for the whole outbreak. Like, come on, like everything's China. Like, I guarantee you, if our economy like super tanks, the first thing Trump is gonna say, it was Chinese. And it's just like, wow, what's the real beef? What is Trump gaining from any sort, whatever his beef is with Siri? When nobody talking to you, I'm sorry. It's my phone. But for real, like, I don't understand what Trump and Pence Trump will benefit from any issues with China. It's almost like they picking and poking, trying to hope they stumble upon some fighting words to get into some. Exactly. China. But yes, it's like everything is about the Chinese government. And if they get into some sort of beef that may possibly result in a war, something like that. Now, a war, now I notice with most of the, especially Republican presidents, very good point, Zach. He said, you think Trump's beef with China comes from his alliance with Russia. That's a good position on that. A very good position on that. The alternate thing I think with that is not only his alliance with Russia. With most Republican presidents, most of them seem to initiate some type of war or conflict that they get our soldiers involved in. So while we're still grappling with pulling soldiers from Afghanistan and Iraq and things like that, that was done way back in the Bush presidency, and we're still struggling to get our soldiers up out of there. I feel like Trump is trying to like poke and prod China in some type of war or conflict with us, because to be honest, all the rich people, all the business people and rich people, a diversified business person has some type of dealings in military manufacturing of if I could speak, military grade weapons and military grade weapons, their uniforms and things like that, manufacturing for that. So when it comes down to that, and we've been, they will benefit. There's money in wars. Now, James from YouTube said, let's be honest, Trump has started no war. Biden voted for every war we've been in for 40 years. That is a fact. Okay, that's fair. Trump started no war, but trust me, he has not spoken out against any war either. So that's a fact as well. Not once will you ever hear Trump say, I'm against this war. Why? Because he still gets a piece of the pie if there's a war involved. So no, he hasn't started a war, but he's definitely doing a lot of poking and prodding, and we don't know which way it's going to go with any conflict with China. So that's my take on it. So that's why I'm looking like, why are you picking? Why are you blaming? Like, if If that's truly where science says the virus came from, then so be it. But it's like when you look at it, everything that Trump says turns into some type of racial thing. Like back when he was mentioning stopping immigration from quote unquote piece of shit companies. I mean, not companies, countries, but he treats them like companies. Um, and my take on that was the piece of shit countries are the ones that where non-white people come from. So we're talking all of the countries in Africa. Um, he has a thing against Muslims. So he's also against Muslim nations. So when he talks about piece of shit countries, he's talking about places where non-white people come from. He is bringing troops from Afghanistan. That's what I was saying. He's bringing troops from Afghanistan, but we got to look at for what purpose. Like I said, we were still struggling to pull troops from Afghanistan and Iraq like that. But when it comes down to actually for what purpose, they're not freeing them up and saying, hey, there's no more war. We can just go back to like keeping America as is. A lot of the things that he's doing and the alliances he's making is actually making the country a little more vulnerable, in my humble opinion. So, as far as Trump stopping the travel from China to the United States during the initial surge of the coronavirus, that seemed very xenophobic. Because you stop travel from one particular country. Now, Pence agreed with that, which was a problem for me. Only because if he stopped travel from all countries, if he stopped any international travel initially, not just from one country, but all travel, then most of us wouldn't have a problem with that, because it doesn't seem like he's singling anyone out, because to be honest, it could have came from anywhere. But he specifically stopped travel to China. So would I err on the side of saying that Pence didn't mean it that way? No, because I think they meant it exactly the way they said it. It was a great decision to stop travel from China to the United States. They don't want Chinese people here any more than they want black people here, only because they're not getting what they want anymore from whatever that Asian European relationship brought them. I have no idea. Okay, so there's that. And then, it's just a history to me of racism within that presidency. It's against the Chinese. He basically sides with white nationalists by not renouncing them. His campaign is largely supported by white nationalists, loud and proud. Not saying that no other candidate has been supported by white nationalists, but not this loud and proud. Okay. And most of them probably told them the same thing in the background, but not had to acknowledge it in the forefront. So it's not saying that every other candidate is good. It's just saying that Trump and his presidency, including Pence, are unapologetically who they are, basically. So they're not hiding it. They're just being forced to explain it. I'll say it that way. Now, my other issue is that Pence ignored a lot of the questions. So no shocker there. If it's not his boss dodging questions and just shutting people down during his debate, Pence basically did the same thing. This is why a lot of people said, a Pence presidency wouldn't be very much different from a Trump presidency. Pence acts like an adult, but he does the same things Trump does, but he just does it on an adult level. But they're the same person, to be honest. And also, a lot of what Pence's strategy was in this debate, number one, he answered what he wanted to. He completely dodged questions. Like I mentioned before, he mostly went after whatever he wanted to respond to. And then he would encroach on Kamala's time by insisting on then maybe broaching the subject a little bit. And I do mean a little bit because most of it he was not answering. I didn't get any answers to the questions. Most of them tap danced around a lot of the questions. So um, let's see. Both of them, another interesting thing, I feel like both of them dodged the question about the health and age of their supervisors, essentially. Um, both of both presidents are up in age. Trump is like 74. Um, Biden is like 78. So with that being said, they're both pretty old, and neither one of them wanted to comment on the overall health and wellness of the president and of the president and and the presidential nominee, which is understandable because that's privacy concerns. But also when we're talking about how whether or not they've gone over any handover plans is essentially what that question was. Both of them dodged that question. Both of them, I feel, dodged the question. They just used it as a way to push further home the point of the values of each president, but or president and presidential nominee, but they did not answer the question directly or indirectly about whether or not there's any transitional plans should the president become disabled or deceased, which I think that was a key point because we'd want to know if these people that are up in age, one with questionable health right now with a COVID scare and they're not completely out of the dark, we need to know that we actually have a leader and that one that can literally take the baton and continue the marathon. You know, it's a big thing. James, Trump is no champion of racial issues outside, not criminal justice, but Biden was hanging out with white racists like Jesse Helms, Strom Thurmond, Senator Eastland, who he called mentors in the Senate. Well, true, but once again, it's like whether or not you're hanging out with them and talking about and actually having white nationalists support your campaign are two different things. Yeah, he was pictured with them. Yeah, we know they buddies and whatever. But at the end of the day, when we talk about who they hang out with and who they're actually having their supporters do so much in their name. So it becomes a whole big different thing. But I mean, at the end of the day, we know that the political party was mostly made and ran by white men, whether they're Democratic or Republican. So we know they racist. The whole party has been racist. And, anything that has ever come to any good that has ever come to any minorities under these racist white men has always been as a side effect of what's best for their businesses. So we can all agree there. Any laws that are made or enacted has always been in the personal interest of the politicians. And that actually brings me to another one of the topics or at least something that was brought up about about taxes. So when they were talking about taxes and things like that, and Trump was talking about, well, not Trump, but Kamala had brought up about how little taxes Trump has paid, and the fact that he's in debt and all this other stuff, and he's the president, and essentially it will sound like the laws and policies that he pushes forward are in his best interest and people like him best interest, which is basically millionaires, business owners, everything, which is true. Can I knock them? Not really, but yes, I can, because technically, which I found hilarious, that Pence wants to bring up about the separation of power. Trump is, and the way he's running the country, he's trying to be a dictator. He's probably jealous that Putin is a dictator, and that's what he wants. So when he's talking about separation of powers and everything like that, it's not representative of the presidency and the administration that he's serving under. So there was a lot of hypocrisy in what Pence was trying to, in the jabs that Pence was trying to make. So there was another thing. It's a lot of misdirection. So in most of those debates, it's mostly hard to get some details. And while we were along the lines of um, who was doing what, while we were along those lines, sorry, I took some notes during this thing. When we're talking about the economy, so of course, Kamala's campaign is all about higher taxes on wealthy and businesses. And that's what I was talking about that. And Pence just went off on a tangent talking about China again. So maybe that's the answer to my question earlier about Trump, and their tariffs. Maybe Chinese have been encroaching on that. But actually, that is one of the things that was mentioned about how the Chinese have encroached on business. So there we go. I've answered my own question. It had a lot to do with money more so than anything. Okay, James, you're talking about why is Biden collecting Social Security and he is a millionaire and Trump donates his salary to charity? Just saying and asking. Is he actually donating his salary to charity? And once again, if he's donating his salary to charity, when you donate so much money, you get that money right back. So I'm not impressed with James. Not James. I'm not impressed by Trump donating his salary. He's getting that money right back. Literally right back. I'm not gonna pat him on the back for that. It's a whole big show, and actually it ties into Trump being able to pay so little in taxes. They do all that big show like, oh, I'm donating millions of dollars to charity, hundreds of thousands of dollars to charity. And guess what? He's getting it right back. Why? Because he's using those charitable funds to be able to basically get away with not paying taxes. It's a tax write-off. He gets it back, or the rest of the money doesn't leave his pocket. So no, that's not even, yeah, exactly, $750. So he used all his debts, so all the money he's lost in bad business decisions. So once again, horrible business decisions. All the businesses he's had have plundered. Well, clearly not all, because he has some money, but once again, another thing we need to talk about is white people and their legacy. Their name can help them get tons of money, not just their credit, but their name. If you have a rich name, you get tons of money. So his legacy alone can afford him the money, but he's lost tons and tons of money in different investments and businesses and things like that. But he has an amazing tax attorney to be able to legally not pay anything more than $750 in taxes in the tax year, when we know he needs to be paying hundreds of thousands. And anybody who justifies that, I'm sorry, it's just not right. Especially if you work a regular 9 to 5 and you don't have a multi-billion dollar, not even billion, you don't have a multi-million dollar company. A 6-figure company is a modest living, but it's not. And don't get me wrong, it's not a bad living, but the moves he's making is still not for you if you're not like a huge corporation. So it's just like people cheer on for where they want to be in life, and I think that's great. Yes, I know the president gets $400,000 a year, James. So once again, not impressed by him donating that money, because that counts into his income. He gave a portion of it away so that he won't have to pay anything. So add in that 400,000, and then he still has millions of dollars at his disposal. Make it make sense, especially when people that are low income still have to pay way more than $750 in taxes. I pay way more in taxes than the president. That should not be. So yeah, okay. So anyway, so back to this, and So when we talk about, oh yeah, they also asked about Pence and Trump, and both parties to answer if they thought China was the enemy, an ally, or whatever. Clearly, Trump's uh, administration thinks that China is the enemy, and during this talk, it was a light bulb moment that the reason why they think China is the enemy because China and its imports is an enemy to their businesses. So that's my take on it. And as far as the Biden Harris ticket, that's still pretty hazy. So through all this talking and discussing and everything, and who's the what's and where's, the one thing I want to bring out is, of course, these debates are verbal spars. So you don't really go to get true information on the candidates and their stance. Well, it's supposed to be to highlight each other's stances, but it turns into a lot of verbal sparring, which is the whole key. It's a debate that's what's supposed to go on. I would highly encourage if anybody is still on the fence to definitely look beyond each candidate's whatever they put on their website. Look beyond their pre-made website for the presidential campaigns. Look at each person's track record, okay, and see what you believe in, and see who speaks to you more. This is why I said I'm kind of at an impasse, because I was just like willing to vote for a third party, because at the end of the day, I know what Kamala's track record is. I know what Biden's track record is. I know what Trump's very short-lived track record is. I know what Pence's is. So when someone like me says that, hey, I know the facts on these people, and I really am not buying into it, let them be. The only thing I want everybody to do is vote your conscience, pay attention to what's said in the debates, but make sure you're looking up your own facts. Make sure what you're looking up and what's going on. Like, I will say earth science for me was years ago. That was high school. I have not seen earth science, even though I was a science major in college. Mine was more about physiology, human anatomy, than it was about earth. So when they started speaking about fracking, I know a lot of people did not know what fracking is. I had to look it up and realize what it was and see what my stance on it is with that limited earth science education. So I'm not afraid to say that I didn't know what it was, but it is an important thing to look into. So there's a reason fracking has a lot to do with oil wells. So they put the high pressure liquid into the ground to force up the gas or force up oil to the surface so that they can extract it from the earth. The problem with that is, yes, it does increase fossil fuels into the impacts air quality. It could potentially impact water supplies and things like that because of the way it drills in. That's what those oil wells and gas wells do. That's what they're doing, is drilling into the earth to force these things up. So when you talk about that, you really have to pay attention, and that stuff does impact about the earth and how long it's here. So if you're one of those conservationists who cares about the preservation of earth and the environment, you definitely want to pay attention to everyone's stance on fracking. But yes, overall, I'd want to look more into what each candidate feels about green initiatives, because most of them, I think green initiatives and racial issues and things like that are all things that they like to use in these debates. But once they're voted in, most people are not really checking for it. They're not really doing much. So it's interesting to see if these people will actually act on any of these things. The last interesting thing I want to bring up from the debate that was not a shocker to me was their stances on Breonna Taylor and her situation. And the deal is with the whole Breonna Taylor thing, Pence smugly, he had a smug look on his face when he did this. When he answered the question about whether Breonna Taylor received justice, he said justice prevailed. And that was a problem for me because you cannot deny. It's very easy to say, oh, justice will prevail with George Floyd, because nothing really has happened right now, and they're hoping nothing really does happen. But to say justice prevailed in the killers of Breonna Taylor being able to not be charged with her murder when they were the ones who started it, yeah, it's a whole problem for me. Kamala, of course, answered the question dead on. That was one of the very few questions she answered head on, with no roundabout talk. Pence answered it head on after a while, but I couldn't believe how smug he was about saying justice prevailed, and it just it just doesn't sit well with me. So, well, in light of the facts, once again, just in light of the facts, I definitely just hope everybody does their own due diligence, do their own research on everybody, and also voting is your voice. So definitely make sure whenever you vote, whether you're voting by mail, if you're going to go to the polls, if you're doing early voting, just make sure you are voting. And once again, vote your conscience. Don't just decide to stay home because you don't think it matters. It does. And also everybody who's pressuring people like, oh, a vote not for Biden is a vote for Trump. Okay, there is a third candidate, and her name is Jo Jorgensen. Because the Libertarian Party does not have big money like that, they can't buy their way into debates. It takes money. But there's always a third candidate no one ever looks into. I know a lot of people feel like, oh, it's too close to look at someone else. The point I'm trying to make is there's options. There's options. You don't have to vote for one person or the other. There is a third option. And I mean, at this point, I think the race is a crapshoot. So vote early, vote often, and hopefully you guys have a good night. Thanks for being up with me to discuss this, and y'all have a good one. Good night.